The spaceport was buzzing with activity. People hurried in every direction, their faces hidden under hoods and masks. The air smelled of fuel and sweat. In the middle of the chaos, a man stood out. He was tall, with a worn-out jacket and a desperate look in his eyes. He was a wanted man, and everyone knew it. The royal guard stood a few feet away, his polished armor gleaming under the harsh lights. He was calm, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. The fugitive's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. There was none. "Don't come any closer," the fugitive shouted, pulling out a gun. The crowd gasped and stepped back, creating a circle around the two men. The guard didn't flinch. He raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "You don't have to do this," the guard said, his voice steady. "Put the gun down, and we can talk." The fugitive's hand trembled. Sweat dripped down his face. "You don't understand. They'll kill me if I surrender." The guard took a step forward. "I can protect you. But you need to trust me." For a moment, it seemed like the fugitive might listen. Then, his eyes hardened. "No. You're one of them." He raised the gun, aiming it straight at the guard's chest. The crowd held its breath. Time seemed to stop. And then, the guard did something no one expected. He smiled. Before anyone could react, the guard moved. In one swift motion, he disarmed the fugitive and pinned him to the ground. The gun clattered away, and the crowd erupted in cheers. But as the guard stood up, his expression was unreadable. He looked down at the fugitive, who was now in handcuffs, and whispered something only the two of them could hear. "You're not safe yet. But I'll make sure you survive." The fugitive's eyes widened in shock. Before he could say anything, the guard signaled for backup. The crowd began to disperse, but the tension in the air remained. Something big was about to happen. And no one knew what it was. The fugitive sat in a cold, dimly lit cell, his hands still trembling from the encounter at the spaceport. He stared at the floor, his mind racing. How had it come to this? Just a few months ago, he had been a respected scientist, working on cutting-edge technology for the royal family. Now, he was a wanted man, hunted by the very people he had once served. His name was not important anymore. To the world, he was just a criminal. But to himself, he was a man who had stumbled upon a truth too dangerous to ignore. It had started with a routine project. The royal family had commissioned him to develop a new form of communication technology, something that could connect people across the galaxy instantly. At first, it seemed like a noble endeavor. But as he dug deeper, he found something unsettling. Hidden within the code was a secondary function, a way to manipulate thoughts and control behavior. He had confronted his superiors, demanding answers. They had smiled and told him it was just a safety feature, a way to prevent misuse of the technology. But he wasn't convinced. He began to investigate on his own, digging through classified files and encrypted databases. What he discovered was worse than he could have imagined. The royal family wasn't just developing a communication device. They were building a weapon, a way to control the minds of their citizens, to erase dissent and ensure absolute loyalty. It was a tool of oppression, disguised as progress. He had tried to expose the truth. He had sent messages to journalists, uploaded files to public servers, even reached out to other scientists. But every attempt was blocked. The royal family's reach was too far, their power too great. And then, the threats began. First, it was anonymous messages, warning him to stop. Then, his lab was raided, his equipment destroyed. Finally, they came for his family. He remembered the night vividly. He had been working late, as usual, when he received a frantic call from his wife. "They're here," she had screamed. "They're breaking in." He had rushed home, but it was too late. The house was in ruins, the doors smashed, the windows shattered. His wife and children were gone, taken by men in black uniforms. That was when he had run. He had spent weeks hiding, moving from one place to another, always looking over his shoulder. He had no plan, no allies, no hope. All he had was the truth, and the knowledge that he couldn't let it die with him. And then, he had been caught. The royal guard had cornered him at the spaceport, and for a moment, he had thought it was over. But the guard's words had given him a glimmer of hope. "You're not safe yet. But I'll make sure you survive." What did it mean? Was the guard on his side? Or was it just another trick, another way to break him? He didn't know. But as he sat in that cell, waiting for whatever came next, he made a decision. He would fight. Not just for himself, but for his family, for the truth, for everyone who had ever been silenced by the powerful. The door to his cell creaked open, and the royal guard stepped inside. "It's time to talk," the guard said, his voice low and serious. The fugitive looked up, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm listening." The guard closed the cell door behind him, his movements deliberate and calm. He pulled up a chair and sat across from the fugitive, his expression unreadable. The dim light of the cell flickered, casting shadows on the walls. For a moment, neither man spoke. "You're not what I expected," the fugitive said, breaking the silence. The guard raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "A loyal servant of the royal family. Someone who would do anything to protect their secrets." The guard leaned back, his armor creaking softly. "Things aren't always what they seem." The fugitive studied him carefully. There was something in the guard's eyes, a flicker of pain, of regret. It was a look he hadn't seen before, not from someone in uniform. "Why did you help me?" the fugitive asked. The guard hesitated, as if weighing his words. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." The fugitive's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" The guard sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was once like you. I believed in the royal family. I thought they were just and fair. But then I saw the truth." He paused, his gaze distant, as if reliving a memory. "I had a family once. A wife and a daughter. They were my world. But when I started asking too many questions, when I got too close to the truth, they were taken from me. Just like yours." The fugitive's breath caught in his throat. "What happened to them?" The guard's jaw tightened. "They were killed. Made to look like an accident. But I knew better. I knew it was a warning." The room fell silent, the weight of the guard's words hanging in the air. The fugitive felt a pang of sympathy, but also a surge of hope. If the guard had suffered like him, maybe he could be trusted. "Why are you still working for them?" the fugitive asked. The guard's eyes hardened. "Because it's the only way to get close. To find the evidence I need to bring them down. But I can't do it alone." The fugitive leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we have the same enemy. And if we work together, we might have a chance to stop them." The fugitive hesitated. It was a risky proposition. The guard could be lying, trying to trap him. But something in the man's voice, in his eyes, felt genuine. "What's your plan?" the fugitive asked. The guard leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The royal family is hosting a gala in 3 days. It's a high-security event, but I can get us in. If we can access their private servers during the event, we can expose everything. The mind control technology, the assassinations, all of it." The fugitive's mind raced. It was a dangerous plan, but it might be their only chance. "And if we get caught?" he asked. The guard's expression turned grim. "Then we die. But at least we'll die fighting." The fugitive nodded slowly. He had nothing left to lose. "All right," he said. "I'm in." The guard stood up, extending a hand. The guard returned a few hours later, carrying a bundle of clothes and a small device. He tossed the clothes to the fugitive. "Put these on," he said. "You're coming with me." The fugitive changed quickly, shedding his worn-out jacket for the crisp uniform of a royal servant. The guard handed him the device, a small, sleek communicator. "This will let us stay in contact," the guard explained. "It's encrypted, so they won't be able to trace it. But use it only if absolutely necessary." The fugitive nodded, slipping the device into his pocket. "What's the plan?" "We're getting you out of here," the guard said. "But we need to move fast. Follow my lead, and don't say a word." They stepped out of the cell and into a narrow corridor. The guard led the way, his movements confident and deliberate. The fugitive followed closely, his heart pounding with every step. They passed several guards along the way, but no one questioned them. The fugitive kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. He could feel the weight of the uniform, the disguise that was his only protection. As they approached the exit, the guard paused, glancing at a security camera. He tapped a few buttons on his wrist device, and the camera's light flickered off. "We have about 30 seconds, he whispered. "Go." They slipped through the door and into the night. The air was cool, the streets quiet. The guard led the fugitive to a parked vehicle, its engine already running. "Get in," the guard said. The fugitive climbed into the passenger seat, and the guard took the wheel. They drove in silence, the city lights fading behind them as they headed toward the outskirts. After a while, the guard spoke. "There's something you need to know." The fugitive turned to him. "What is it?" "The royal family's plan is bigger than you think," the guard said. "It's not just about controlling the population. They're planning to launch the mind control technology on a massive scale. Once it's activated, no one will be able to resist. Not even us." The fugitive's stomach churned. "When?" "Soon," the guard said. "That's why we need to act now. If we can access their servers at the gala, we might be able to stop it." The fugitive stared out the window, his mind racing. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. If they failed, millions of lives would be at stake. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. The guard glanced at him. "Because you deserve to know what you're fighting for. And because I need you to be ready." The fugitive nodded, his resolve hardening. He had lost everything, but he couldn't let the royal family win. They arrived at a small, secluded safe house tucked away in the woods. The guard parked the vehicle and led the fugitive inside. "We'll stay here until the gala," the guard said. "It's not much, but it's safe." The fugitive looked around. The safe house was sparse, with just a few basic amenities. But it was enough. As they settled in, the guard handed the fugitive a tablet. "This contains everything we know about the royal family's plans. Study it. Memorize it. We need to be prepared for anything." The fugitive took the tablet, his fingers trembling slightly. He opened the files and began to read. The more he read, the more horrified he became. The royal family's conspiracy was vast, reaching into every corner of society. They had spies, assassins, and advanced technology at their disposal. And they were willing to do whatever it took to maintain their power. But there was something else, a glimmer of hope. Hidden within the files was a reference to a failsafe, a way to shut down the mind control technology before it could be activated. The fugitive looked up at the guard. "Do you know about this?" The guard nodded. "It's our best chance. But accessing it won't be easy. The failsafe is located in the royal family's private server room, deep within the palace. It's heavily guarded, and the security systems are nearly impenetrable." The fugitive set the tablet down, his mind racing. "We'll need a distraction. Something big enough to draw their attention away from the server room." The guard smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd say that." They spent the next few hours planning, going over every detail, every possible scenario. The fugitive's scientific knowledge proved invaluable, helping them devise a way to bypass the security systems. By the time they were done, the fugitive felt a strange sense of calm. He had a purpose now, a mission. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't alone. As they prepared to rest, the guard turned to him. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start preparing for the gala. The fugitive nodded, lying down on the makeshift bed. But sleep didn't come easily. His mind was filled with thoughts of what lay ahead, the danger, the risks, the possibility of failure. But there was also hope. And that was enough to keep him going. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. The fugitive and the guard spent every waking moment going over the plan, refining every detail, and preparing for every possible outcome. They trained together, the guard teaching the fugitive how to handle himself in close combat, while the fugitive shared his knowledge of the royal family's technology. Despite their differences, they began to form a bond. They were two men who had lost everything, united by a common enemy. They didn't talk much about their pasts, but there was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared pain that fueled their determination. On the morning of the gala, the tension was palpable. The guard handed the fugitive a small earpiece. "This will allow us to communicate during the mission," he said. "But remember, only use it if absolutely necessary. We can't afford any mistakes." The fugitive nodded, inserting the earpiece. "What's the first step?" "We need to get inside," the guard said. "I've arranged for us to pose as maintenance workers. Once we're in, we'll split up. You'll head to the server room, and I'll create a distraction." The fugitive's heart raced. "What kind of distraction?" The guard's lips curved into a faint smile. "Let's just say it'll be hard to miss." They drove to the palace in silence, the grandeur of the building looming in the distance. The gala was already in full swing, with guests arriving in droves. The guard parked the vehicle in a secluded area and handed the fugitive a toolkit. "Remember, act natural," the guard said. "We're just here to fix a broken generator." They approached the service entrance, where a security guard stood watch. The guard flashed a badge, and the security guard waved them through without a second glance. Once inside, they moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. The palace was a maze of corridors and rooms, but the guard knew the layout by heart. He led the fugitive to a storage closet and handed him a map. "The server room is here," the guard said, pointing to a location on the map. "It's 2 floors down. Take the service elevator and avoid the main hallways. Once you're in, you'll have 10 minutes to access the failsafe." The fugitive nodded, his hands trembling slightly. "And you?" "I'll be causing a distraction in the main hall," the guard said. "It should draw most of the security away from the server room. But once the alarm is raised, you'll need to move fast." The fugitive took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "All right. Let's do this." The guard placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good luck." They split up, the guard heading toward the main hall, while the fugitive made his way to the service elevator. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, each second stretching out as his mind raced with possibilities. When the doors finally opened, he found himself in a dimly lit corridor. The server room was just ahead, its door guarded by 2 armed security officers. The fugitive's heart pounded. He hadn't expected this. He had hoped the guard's distraction would draw them away, but it seemed they were still at their posts. He crouched behind a stack of crates, trying to think of a plan. He couldn't take them on directly, he was no fighter. But he had to get inside. Just then, his earpiece crackled to life. "I'm in position," the guard's voice whispered. "Get ready." The fugitive braced himself, his eyes fixed on the guards. A moment later, the sound of an explosion echoed through the palace, followed by screams and the blaring of alarms. The guards at the server room door exchanged a glance, then one of them ran off toward the commotion. The other hesitated, clearly torn between staying at his post and investigating the noise. This was his chance. The fugitive moved quickly, slipping past the remaining guard and into the server room. The door hissed shut behind him, and he found himself surrounded by rows of humming servers. He pulled out the tablet the guard had given him and connected it to the main console. The screen lit up, displaying a series of complex codes and security protocols. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his mind focused. He had studied the royal family's systems for weeks, and he knew exactly what to do. But as he worked, a sense of unease crept over him. Something felt off. The security protocols were different from what he had expected, more advanced. He glanced at the time. 5 minutes had already passed. "Come on," he muttered, his fingers moving faster. Finally, he found it, the failsafe. But as he reached for the button, the door to the server room burst open. The fugitive spun around, his heart sinking. Standing in the doorway was the royal advisor, a cold smile on his face. "I knew you'd come," the advisor said. "You're too predictable." The fugitive's mind raced. He had to activate the failsafe, but the advisor was blocking his way. "It's over," the advisor said, stepping closer. "You've lost." The fugitive's hand hovered over the button. He had one chance, one moment to make a difference. And then, he made his move. The fugitive's hand shot toward the failsafe button, but the royal advisor was faster. With a swift motion, he grabbed the fugitive's wrist and twisted it painfully, forcing him to drop the tablet. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" the advisor sneered, his grip tightening. "You're nothing but a pawn in a game you don't even understand." The fugitive winced, struggling against the advisor's hold. "You won't get away with this," he hissed. "People will find out the truth." The advisor laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "The truth? The truth is whatever we say it is. And soon, no one will even remember your name." Just then, the door to the server room burst open again. The fugitive's heart leapt as the royal guard rushed in, his weapon drawn. "Let him go," the guard shouted, his voice firm and commanding. The advisor's smile widened. "Ah, the traitor. I was wondering when you'd show up." The guard's eyes narrowed. "It's over. The failsafe is activated. Your plans are ruined." The advisor's grip on the fugitive's wrist loosened slightly, his confidence wavering. "You're lying." The guard stepped closer, his weapon aimed steadily at the advisor. "Am I? Check the console if you don't believe me." For a moment, the advisor hesitated. Then, with a snarl, he shoved the fugitive aside and turned to the console. The fugitive stumbled, catching himself on the edge of a server rack. The advisor's fingers flew across the keyboard, his expression growing darker with each passing second. "What have you done?" he growled, his voice trembling with rage. The guard didn't answer. Instead, he moved quickly, grabbing the fugitive and pulling him toward the door. "We need to go. Now." The fugitive didn't argue. They ran down the corridor, the sound of alarms blaring around them. The palace was in chaos, with guards and staff rushing in every direction. As they reached the service elevator, the fugitive glanced at the guard. "Did you really activate the failsafe?" The guard shook his head. "No. But I bought us some time." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. The guard pressed the button for the ground floor, and the elevator began to descend. "What now?" the fugitive asked, his voice tense. "Now, we get out of here," the guard said. "The advisor will realize the failsafe isn't activated, and he'll come after us with everything he's got." The fugitive's heart sank. "So we failed." The guard turned to him, his expression grim but determined. "Not yet. We still have a chance. But we need to move fast." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped out into a narrow service tunnel. The guard led the way, his movements quick and precise. The fugitive followed closely, his mind racing. They were almost to the exit when a voice echoed behind them. "Stop right there." The fugitive turned to see a group of royal guards approaching, their weapons drawn. At the front of the group was the royal advisor, his face twisted with fury. "You thought you could escape?" the advisor spat. "You're nothing but insects, scurrying around in the dark." The guard raised his weapon, his eyes scanning the group. "Stay behind me," he whispered to the fugitive. The fugitive's heart pounded. They were outnumbered, outgunned. There was no way they could fight their way out. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the royal guards stepped forward, lowering his weapon. "We're not doing this," he said, his voice firm. The advisor turned to him, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you talking about?" "Shoot them." The guard shook his head. "No. We've heard the rumors. We know what you're planning. And we won't be a part of it." For a moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, the other guards lowered their weapons. The advisor's face turned red with rage. "You traitors! You'll pay for this." The guard who had spoken turned to the fugitive and the royal guard. "Go. We'll hold him off." The fugitive hesitated, but the royal guard grabbed his arm. "Come on. This is our chance." They ran toward the exit, the sound of shouting and scuffling fading behind them. As they burst out into the night, the fugitive felt a surge of hope. But it was short-lived. As they reached the vehicle, a shot rang out. The royal guard stumbled, clutching his side. The fugitive's heart stopped. "No." The guard gritted his teeth, his face pale with pain. "Get in the vehicle. Now." The fugitive helped him into the passenger seat, then climbed into the driver's side. He started the engine and sped away, his hands trembling on the wheel. "Hang on," he said, his voice shaking. "We're going to get you help." The guard leaned back, his breathing labored. "Don't worry about me. Just keep driving." The fugitive's eyes filled with tears as he glanced at the guard. "You can't die. Not now. Not after everything." The guard managed a faint smile. "We're not done yet. Not by a long shot." But as they drove into the night, the fugitive couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The fugitive drove through the night, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The royal guard sat beside him, his breathing shallow and labored. Blood seeped through his fingers as he pressed a hand to his side, trying to stem the flow. "We need to get you to a doctor," the fugitive said, his voice tense. The guard shook his head weakly. "No time. They'll be watching every hospital, every clinic. We need to stick to the plan." "You're in no condition to fight," the fugitive argued. "We can't do this without you." The guard turned to him, his eyes fierce, despite his pain. "You can. And you will. The plan hasn't changed. We just need to adjust it." The fugitive's mind raced. The original plan had been risky enough, but now, with the guard injured, it seemed almost impossible. Still, he knew they had no other choice. "All right," he said finally. "What do we do?" The guard leaned back, wincing as he shifted in his seat. "We need to get to the broadcast tower. It's the only way to expose the royal family's plans to the public. If we can transmit the evidence we have, the people will rise up. They'll have no choice." The fugitive nodded, his resolve hardening. "Where is it?" "On the outskirts of the city," the guard said. "It's heavily guarded, but if we can get inside, we can override the security systems and send out the transmission." The fugitive glanced at him. "And how do we do that?" The guard managed a faint smile. "That's where you come in. You're the scientist. You know how their systems work. I'll get you inside, but you'll have to do the rest." The fugitive's heart pounded. The weight of the task felt overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't back down. "All right," he said. "Let's do it." They drove in silence for a while, the city lights fading behind them as they approached the outskirts. The broadcast tower loomed in the distance, its lights blinking against the night sky. As they neared the tower, the guard pointed to a small service road. "Take that. It'll lead us to a back entrance." The fugitive turned onto the road, driving slowly, to avoid drawing attention. They parked the vehicle behind a cluster of trees, out of sight from the main road. The guard opened the door and stepped out, leaning heavily on the vehicle for support. The fugitive rushed to his side, slinging the guard's arm over his shoulder. "You're not going to make it far like this," the fugitive said, his voice filled with concern. I'll make it, the guard said through gritted teeth. Just keep moving. They made their way toward the tower, sticking to the shadows. The guard's breathing grew more labored with each step, but he refused to stop. As they reached the back entrance, the guard pulled out a small device and pressed a button. The door clicked open, and they slipped inside. The interior of the tower was dimly lit, with rows of servers and equipment humming softly. The guard pointed to a control panel on the far wall. That's it, he said. You need to override the security system and upload the evidence. I'll keep watch. The fugitive hesitated. What if I can't do it? The guard placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm despite his weakness. You can. You're the only one who can. The fugitive nodded, his determination returning. He moved to the control panel and began working, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The guard stood by the door, his weapon drawn, his eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of movement. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The fugitive's heart raced as he worked, his mind focused on the task at hand. Finally, the screen lit up with a message, security override complete. Ready to transmit. The fugitive let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It's done. I just need to upload the files. The guard nodded, his face pale but determined. Do it. Quickly. The fugitive inserted the tablet into the console and began uploading the evidence. The progress bar moved slowly, each second feeling like an hour. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The guard tensed, his grip tightening on his weapon. They're here, he whispered. The fugitive's heart pounded. I need more time. The guard stepped into the corridor, his weapon raised. I'll hold them off. Just finish the upload. The fugitive wanted to argue, to tell the guard he couldn't do it alone. But he knew there was no other choice. As the sound of gunfire erupted in the corridor, the fugitive focused on the screen, his fingers trembling as he worked. The progress bar reached 90%. 95%. 98%. And then, it was done. The screen flashed, transmission complete. The fugitive let out a cry of relief. It's over. We did it. But as he turned to the corridor, his relief turned to horror. The guard was lying on the floor, his weapon still clutched in his hand. Around him were the bodies of several royal guards, but he was badly wounded, his breathing shallow and uneven. The fugitive rushed to his side, dropping to his knees. No, no, no. Hang on. We did it. The evidence is out. The people will know the truth. The guard managed a faint smile, his eyes filled with pride. You did it. I knew you could. Tears streamed down the fugitive's face as he gripped the guard's hand. You can't die. Not now. Not after everything. The guard's grip tightened slightly. It's not over yet. The fight's just beginning. You need to keep going. For both of us. And then, his hand went limp. The fugitive sat there for a moment, his heart breaking. But he knew the guard was right. The fight wasn't over. He stood up, wiping his tears, and turned toward the exit. The truth was out. And now, it was time to face the consequences. The fugitive stepped out of the broadcast tower, the cool night air hitting his face. His heart was heavy. But his resolve was stronger than ever. The guard's sacrifice would not be in vain. The truth was out there now, spreading like wildfire. As he made his way through the shadows, he could hear the distant sounds of chaos, shouts, sirens, and the hum of vehicles speeding through the streets. The city was waking up to the reality of the royal family's corruption, and the people were beginning to react. He needed to get to safety, but he also needed to see the impact of what they had done. He pulled out the small communicator the guard had given him and tuned into the public news channels. The screens lit up with breaking news. Shocking revelation, royal family's dark secrets exposed. The fugitive's breath caught as he watched the footage. The evidence they had transmitted was being broadcast across every major network. Videos of secret meetings, documents detailing the mind control technology, and recordings of the royal advisor admitting to the conspiracy. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. The people were in an uproar. Crowds had gathered in the streets, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. The royal family's once impenetrable facade was crumbling, and the fugitive felt a surge of hope. But it wasn't over yet. The royal family would not go down without a fight. He knew they would try to suppress the truth, to twist the narrative in their favor. He had to keep moving, to stay one step ahead. As he navigated the back alleys, he heard footsteps behind him. He froze, pressing himself against a wall. Peering around the corner, he saw a group of royal guards searching the area, their weapons drawn. "Find him," one of them barked. "He can't have gone far." The fugitive's heart raced. He needed a distraction, a way to slip past them. His eyes fell on a nearby trash bin. He picked up a rock and hurled it at the bin, the sound echoing through the alley. The guards turned toward the noise, giving him just enough time to dart across the street and into another alley. He ran as fast as he could, his lungs burning, until he reached a small, abandoned building. Inside, he found a makeshift hideout, a table covered in maps, weapons, and communication devices. It was clear that others had been preparing for this moment, too. He picked up a handheld radio and tuned into a frequency he had heard the guard mention. "This is the fugitive," he said, his voice trembling. "I need help." There was a moment of silence, and then a voice crackled through. "We've been waiting for you. Stay where you are. We're coming." The fugitive slumped against the wall, relief washing over him. He wasn't alone. There were others who had been fighting in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Minutes later, the door creaked open, and a group of rebels entered. They were a mix of men and women, their faces hardened by years of resistance. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "You did it," she said. "You exposed them." The fugitive nodded, his throat tight. "It wasn't just me. There was a guard, he didn't make it." The woman placed a hand on his shoulder. "His sacrifice won't be forgotten. But we're not done yet. The royal family will try to silence us. We need to keep the pressure on." The fugitive straightened, his determination returning. "What's the plan?" The woman gestured to the maps on the table. "We're organizing a rally in the city square. If we can get enough people there, we can show the royal family that we won't back down. But we need you to speak. You're the face of this now." The fugitive hesitated. He had never been a leader, never been one to speak in front of crowds. But he knew he couldn't refuse. "All right," he said. "I'll do it." The rebels moved quickly, gathering supplies and preparing for the rally. The fugitive stayed close, his mind racing with what he would say. As dawn broke, they made their way to the city square. The streets were filled with people, their anger and frustration boiling over. The fugitive climbed onto a makeshift stage, his heart pounding as he looked out at the sea of faces. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "People of this city," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "For too long, we've been lied to. Manipulated. Controlled. But today, the truth has been revealed. And it's up to us to decide what happens next." The crowd cheered, their voices rising in unison. The fugitive felt a surge of energy, a sense of purpose he had never known before. But as he spoke, he noticed movement at the edge of the square. Royal guards were gathering, their weapons drawn. The woman from the rebel group stepped onto the stage, her voice loud and clear. "They're here to silence us. But we won't let them. Stand together, and we can't be broken." The crowd roared, their defiance echoing through the square. The royal guards hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. The fugitive felt a flicker of hope. The people were rising up, and nothing could stop them now. But then, a shot rang out. The woman beside him crumpled to the ground, her hand clutching her side. The crowd erupted into chaos, people screaming and scattering in every direction. The fugitive dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling. No, no, no. Hang on. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination. Keep fighting, she whispered. For all of us. And then, her eyes closed. The fugitive stood up, his grief turning to rage. He turned to the crowd, his voice booming. They can't silence us. They can't break us. We are the truth, and we will not be stopped. The crowd rallied, their fear turning to fury. They surged forward, overwhelming the royal guards and pushing them back. The fugitive stood on the stage, watching as the people took control of their city. The truth had been revealed. And now, it was time to rebuild. The city was alive with the sound of change. The royal family's grip had been broken, their once imposing palace now surrounded by the very people they had tried to control. The streets were filled with celebration, but also with a sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in years, there was hope. The fugitive stood at the edge of the city square, watching as people worked together to clear the debris and rebuild what had been broken. He felt a strange mix of emotions, pride, grief, and a deep sense of responsibility. A young boy approached him, his eyes wide with admiration. Are you the one who exposed the royal family? The fugitive knelt down, meeting the boy's gaze. I was part of it, yes. But it wasn't just me. It was all of us. The boy smiled, his face lighting up. My mom says you're a hero. The fugitive shook his head gently. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who couldn't stay silent anymore. The boy nodded, as if understanding more than he should for his age. I want to help too. What can I do? The fugitive placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You already are. By being here, by caring, you're making a difference. The boy beamed and ran off to join a group of children helping to distribute food and water. The fugitive watched him go, a small smile tugging at his lips. As he stood there, a familiar voice called out to him. You've done well. He turned to see an elderly man approaching, his face lined with age, but his eyes sharp and full of wisdom. The man was one of the leaders of the rebellion, someone who had been fighting the royal family long before the fugitive had even known the truth. Thank you, the fugitive said. But it's not over yet. There's still so much to do. The man nodded. True. But the hardest part is behind us. Now, we rebuild. We create a society where no one has to live in fear, where the truth can never be hidden again. The fugitive looked out at the bustling square, at the people working together to create a better future. It won't be easy. No, the man agreed. But nothing worth doing ever is. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the city came back to life. What will you do now? The man asked. The fugitive thought for a moment. I'll stay. I'll help however I can. This is my home, and these are my people. I owe it to them, and to those who didn't make it, to see this through. The man smiled, a look of approval in his eyes. You've come a long way. The guard would be proud. The mention of the guard brought a pang of grief, but also a sense of peace. The guard had given his life for this cause, and the fugitive knew he couldn't let that sacrifice be in vain. As the days turned into weeks, the fugitive threw himself into the work of rebuilding. He helped organize food distribution, oversaw the dismantling of the royal family's oppressive systems, and worked with others to create a new government, one that would be transparent and accountable to the people. It wasn't easy. There were disagreements, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But through it all, the fugitive held on to the belief that they were building something better. One evening, as the sun set over the city, he stood on a hill overlooking the square. The sounds of laughter and music drifted up to him, a stark contrast to the fear and silence that had once dominated the streets. A young woman approached him, her face familiar. She had been one of the rebels who had fought alongside him in the final days of the uprising. It's amazing, isn't it? She said, gesturing to the city below. What we've accomplished. The fugitive nodded. It is. But we can't forget what it cost. We have to honor those who didn't make it by continuing their work. The woman smiled. We will. And we'll make sure their sacrifices were not in vain. They stood there for a while, watching as the city lit up with the glow of a new beginning. As the fugitive turned to leave, he felt a sense of closure. The fight was far from over, but he knew they were on the right path. And as he walked away, he carried with him the lessons he had learned about courage, sacrifice, and the power of truth. The story of the fugitive and the guard would be told for generations, a reminder of what could be achieved when people stood together and refused to be silenced. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.